My name is Caroline Morgan. I am 26 years old and have just completed my MBA program at the University of Michigan, a milestone that any family would normally consider a source of pride. Yet on graduation day, surrounded by a sea of people embracing and taking photos, I stood alone. There was no sign of my parents, no words of congratulations from my younger sister Sophia, the one they have always placed on a pedestal. I sat in the auditorium, watching my classmates being called over by their parents, smiling under the blue banners of the university, and I wondered if my family had ever thought of me that way. The answer, of course, was something I had known for a long time. Since high school, I had been living with my maternal grandparents in their lake house in Minnesota. Not because I didn't want to live with my parents, but because I could no longer endure the cruel favoritism that defined their household. Sophia, 4 years younger, had been treated as a treasure from the moment she was born. My parents would say over and over, "Sophia is smarter, prettier, more worthy of sacrifice." They said those words right in front of me, and eventually I understood that their house no longer had a place for me. My grandparents saw that pain, opened their arms, and said, "Come here, this home will always have room for you." Those words saved me from a childhood of neglect. The memories of those years are still vivid. I remember family dinners where my parents asked only Sophia about her grades, while my A+ math test was pushed aside without a single word of praise. I remember my 16th birthday, when they forgot to make me a cake because they were too busy taking Sophia dress shopping for her dance. I sat quietly on my bed that night, blowing out the candle stuck into a store-bought cupcake I had purchased myself. The next day, my grandparents drove nearly 3 hours to pick me up, bringing with them a homemade cake baked by my grandmother. That was when I knew. True family is not about blood, but about the people who choose to cherish you. The lake house became the place where I grew up, the place where I learned to believe I still had worth. In the mornings, I walked with my grandfather through the light mist, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. In the afternoons, I sat beside my grandmother in the kitchen, filled with the warm scent of baked goods, learning how to make sweet apple pies. There, no one compared me to Sophia. No one told me I had to sacrifice for my sister. There, I was allowed to simply be myself. The day I held my MBA diploma in my hands, the sound of applause filled the auditorium, but inside me echoed only emptiness. I knew that if my grandparents were still alive, they would have been sitting in the front row, smiling proudly, taking picture after picture, just as they had during my high school graduation. While my classmates ran into the arms of their parents, I stepped out onto the grass, looked up at the blue sky, and for a fleeting moment, I saw my grandfather with his fishing rod, my grandmother smiling as she wiped flour from her hands. They were no longer there, but their promise lived on in my heart. To protect the lake house, the place that held all the memories, the love, and the unwavering belief that I was worthy of being loved. It was bitter to stand alone on a day that should have been filled with shared joy. But in that absence, I understood more deeply that blood does not always mean family. My parents chose Sophia time and again, and I stopped waiting for them to choose me. I had my grandparents, and now I had myself. On that graduation day, amid the cheers and applause, I whispered softly, "I did it, Grandma, Grandpa. I will keep my promise." And from that moment, I knew my real journey was only beginning. Have you ever felt the sting of being hurt by your own family when they should have been your safest place? If this story touches you, I would love to know, where in the world are you listening from? I still remember vividly the very first morning I moved into my grandparents' lake house in Minnesota. As the car stopped in front of the porch, the early sunlight shimmered across the wide lake like a blue mirror, the tall pines standing solemnly with their reflections cast on the water. The old 2-story wooden house, painted ivory white, its roof weathered with time, looked modest yet warm. To many, it was just another lakeside home, worth perhaps a little over $1 million. But to me, it was an entire world, the place where I found the peace my own parents never gave me. In the beginning, I was awkward, unsure of what to do except help Grandma clean rooms and stack books neatly. But Grandpa quickly pulled me into the rhythm of the house. Every morning at 6, he woke me, handed me a pair of rubber boots, and said, "Come on, we've got a garden to take care of." Behind the house stretched a plot filled with tomatoes, green beans, cucumbers, and rows of lavender glowing purple in the sun. I helped him stake the tomato plants, tying them with twine, my hands covered in soil but my heart strangely light. As we worked, he told me stories of his youth in the army, of nights spent in the trenches dreaming only of a quiet garden like this. I listened in silence, and from the warmth of his steady voice I learned that a home is not built from wood and stone alone, but from memory and love. Grandma was the one who taught me the smaller, everyday things that carried so much meaning. Every Saturday morning, she took me to the local farmer's market. We walked past rows of colorful stalls, bright red apples, golden corn, strawberries sweet with fragrance. She showed me how to test if vegetables were fresh by snapping a stem, how to tell a good loaf of bread by the aroma of its crust. On the way back, we often stopped at a small cafe near the lake. She ordered a cappuccino, and I ordered warm milk. She would look at me, smile, and say, "You know, not everyone is lucky enough to have a place to come back to. This house is your place. Always remember that." And when she said those words, it felt as though my heart, cold for so many years, was finally warmed again. On summer afternoons, Grandpa often took me to the lake to fish. He packed the rods, the tackle box, and 2 old folding chairs. I remember one time, as we sat quietly watching the ripples move across the water, I asked, "Grandpa, why do Mom and Dad never look at me the way they look at Sophia?" He placed his hand on my shoulder, his eyes kind but unwavering. "Because they are blind, Caroline. But the truth does not change. You are the child with the strongest heart I've ever known. Believe in that, and don't let anyone make you think otherwise." I sat there for a long time, letting the tears fall into the lake, blending with the soft waves. From that day on, whenever I looked at the still water, I always remembered his words as a quiet reminder that I had value. At night, Grandma's kitchen became the heart of my new childhood. She loved teaching me how to bake, from traditional apple pies to chocolate chip cookies. "Don't measure with just your eyes, feel it with your heart," she often said whenever she saw me clumsily weighing flour. I would laugh, sometimes covered in white dust, and she would laugh with me. In the winter nights, when the wind howled outside the window, the oven glowed red and filled the house with warmth. We would sit together waiting for the pies to finish, sipping hot tea, listening to the soft crackle of wood in the fireplace. In those moments, I felt that I truly belonged. I also became my grandparents' hands and feet in many ways. I took Grandpa to his regular checkups at the small-town hospital, sitting for hours in the waiting room, listening to him grumble about young doctors who didn't know how to listen to patients. I guided Grandma through the supermarket when her knees grew weaker, carrying the heavy grocery bags for her. There were days when I balanced studying with part-time work, exhausted by nightfall, but the sight of their smiles made every burden feel lighter. One evening, after dinner, Grandpa called me out to the porch. The sun was setting, its golden light turning the lake into a sea of fire. He placed a heavy old brass key in my palm. "Caroline," he said, his voice deep and steady. "This house is not just a place to live. It is the heart of our family. One day, when we are no longer here, you must protect it. Keep it for the generations to come, so they will know there is a place of peace, where family truly means love." I gripped the key tightly, my eyes blurring with tears. "I promise, Grandpa," I whispered, my voice trembling. Grandma stepped out, wrapped her arms around my shoulders, and said softly, "We choose you, Caroline. Not because you are the only choice, but because you are the only one who truly cherishes it." End of 5. Grandma's funeral took place on a gray, somber day, with light rain falling as if sharing in the grief. Once again, I was the one carrying the weight, arranging the ceremony and writing the eulogy. Looking around and seeing my parents standing beside Sophia, exchanging cold glances, I realized the distance between us was not only emotional but a chasm that could never be bridged. They hadn't come to honor her memory, they had come to see what was left. The way their eyes scanned the house, the old paintings on the walls, the wooden chairs Grandpa had built with his own hands, it sent a chill through me. The only comfort I had was the will my grandparents had prepared in advance, with the help of our family lawyer, Mr. Pierce. Right after Grandpa's funeral, Grandma had requested that Mr. Pierce come to the house, in my presence, to sign and notarize a formal will. In it, all of their assets, the lake house, the land, and their modest savings were left to me. She looked at me as she signed, her eyes glistening. "You are the only one we trust." Mr. Pierce nodded, carefully storing the documents and promising absolute confidentiality until the time came. After Grandma passed, I met Mr. Pierce at his small office in town. He slid a thick envelope across the desk, sealed with a red stamp. "Caroline," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Everything has been arranged. This will ensure that the house and the assets belong to you. No one can dispute it if we bring it to court. But according to your grandparents' wishes, it will not be revealed unless you are forced to defend your rights." I held the envelope in my hands, heavy as though I were carrying their very hearts. I nodded slowly and answered, "I trust you, and I will keep this secret. I will not let this house fall into the hands of those who do not deserve it." In the days that followed, I lived in the quiet house, sometimes hearing the wind sweep across the porch and imagining that my grandparents were still sitting in the living room. Grandpa with his pipe, Grandma knitting beside him. The loss left me hollow. Many nights I lay in bed feeling like an orphan in a house too large for one. But each time I looked at the old brass key Grandpa had placed in my hand, each time I stepped onto the porch and saw the lake shimmering in the evening light, I reminded myself that I had a responsibility. I could not allow myself to drown in grief. I had to keep my promise. Around that time, I began to notice a shift in my parents' behavior. Suddenly, they started showing up more often, sometimes with flimsy excuses to visit me. But their eyes scanned the house from the old piano to the wine cabinet, not with nostalgia, but with calculation. I knew they were waiting, probing, trying to see whether my grandparents had left anything behind. Sophia was more cunning. She often asked, "Do you keep the house papers, sis?" "I just want to be sure." I would smile coldly and reply, "There's nothing for you to see. This is the house I live in, not a museum." Deep down, I knew that one day they would act. Inside me, the grief for my grandparents still burned, but mingled with it was a fire of determination. I had promised to protect this home, and now I carried not only the legal foundation but also the sacred bond between me and them. I trusted Mr. Pierce. I trusted the fairness of the law. But above all, I trusted the vow tied to my very blood. No matter how difficult the path ahead might be, I would never let this house, the only place that had sheltered me from abandonment, fall into the hands of those who cared only for greed. And so, in the bitter silence after the funeral, I stood alone before the lake, the wind tugging at my hair, whispering, "Grandma, Grandpa, I will keep this house, I promise. Whatever happens, it will remain ours." How was it? After Grandma passed, I thought the lake house would finally be peaceful, with only me and the memories left behind. But soon I realized that peace was only temporary. My parents began to appear more often, no longer with the cold indifference of the past, but with a sudden, suffocating show of concern that felt almost unbearable. One spring afternoon, they knocked on the door carrying a basket of fruit and wearing awkward smiles. My mother said, "You must be so lonely now that your grandparents are gone. We think it's best if we come visit you more often." I set my teacup down and looked straight into her eyes. "I am not lonely. I've been used to that for a very long time." The words made her flinch, but my father quickly interrupted. "Come on, Caroline, don't be so harsh. After all, this is the family's house. You're just here for now. Eventually, it will have to be shared equally." His voice was calm, but I could hear the probing edge in every syllable. Sophia's visits became even more frequent than my parents'. She arrived with an innocent look, sometimes carrying a bag of pastries, other times a bouquet of flowers, and walked in as if the house already belonged to her. Sitting on the sofa, she tilted her head and asked with feigned sweetness. "So, sis, do you keep the original deed to the house? I just want to see it, in case we ever need proof later." I stifled a cold laugh and answered firmly. "I have nothing for you to see. This is the house I live in, not a museum. If you came here looking for documents, you can turn around and leave." Sophia's face flushed, but she tried to keep her voice soft. "I was just being cautious, don't take it the wrong way." I stood, pointing toward the door. "Good, then you should go be cautious somewhere else." Their persistence didn't stop there. Each day brought more hints and veiled comments. My mother would say, "Your grandparents loved Sophia too, surely they wouldn't leave her with nothing." My father would smirk, "The elderly sometimes forget things, mix things up. Who knows if they even remembered to make a will." Those words were not comfort, they were tests, needles probing to see if I would reveal anything. I responded with silence or sharp words that left them seething. I knew they believed my grandparents had never finalized any paperwork, that the house only temporarily belonged to me. What they didn't know was that I had Mr. Pierce and a sealed will that stood like a shield between me and their greed. Another time, Sophia showed up at night. As I walked out of the kitchen, I found her standing in front of the old wooden cabinet where my grandparents used to keep their documents. She jumped when I flicked on the light, then stammered. "I was just looking for the photo album. I remember a picture of me by the lake with Grandma." I stepped closer, my voice low and edged. "You're looking for something, and I don't think it's a photo." She froze, her eyes darting, then slipped past me and hurried out the door. I stood watching, my heart cold as ice. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier each time my parents or Sophia visited. They were no longer relatives mourning a loss, they were predators circling for weakness. I felt the weight of every scrutinizing glance, every barbed comment. At one rare shared meal, my mother suddenly asked, "Caroline, don't you think it's unfair if everything belongs only to you?" I set my fork and knife down, lifted my head, and looked directly at her. Fairness is what my grandparents decided long ago. And I don't need to explain it. The table fell silent, broken only by the clinking of Sophia's spoon against her bowl. From their actions, their eyes, and their words, I understood the storm was beginning to form. They no longer hid the truth that their target was the house. To them, the lake house worth $1.2 million was nothing more than a prize to fight over. To me, it was blood, breath, the only spiritual legacy my grandparents left behind. We looked at each other without speaking, but the battle lines were already drawn. I began training my mind for the confrontation. I no longer waited for kindness from my parents or from Sophia. On nights I sat alone by the lake, I remembered Grandpa's words. "One day, someone will try to take this house from you. Be strong, Caroline." And I whispered into the wind. "I'm ready now, Grandma, Grandpa, I won't let them take it." Entry point. When the whispers turned into action, I knew the undercurrents in my family were about to swell into a storm. And this time, I was no longer the child who stepped back. I was the sole heir of my grandparents, both in spirit and in law. I had been preparing for the day they would finally make their move. One early summer morning, as sunlight slipped through the curtains, I heard a car stop at the gate. Unlike their previous visits filled with forced smiles, this time my parents and Sophia stepped out with grim faces, carrying a thick stack of papers. They didn't wait for me to open the door. They pushed straight into the living room, their eyes gleaming as if victory was already in their hands. My father sat heavily on the sofa, placed the stack on the wooden table, slid it toward me, and declared with certainty, "Caroline, everything is clear. Your grandparents left this house to Sophia. You've only been staying here temporarily." I looked at the papers, forcing my voice to remain calm. Strange. I lived with them until their very last days, and they never once mentioned that. Sophia crossed her arms, smirking with arrogance. "You weren't always with them. Maybe when you weren't around, they changed their minds. This is the proof." She pulled out a page from the stack and slapped it down on the table like a winning card. I picked up the supposed will, flipping through page by page. My eyes stopped at the signature at the bottom. It was shaky, uneven, completely unlike the bold, decisive strokes my grandfather had used on every legal document I had ever witnessed him sign. I knew his handwriting intimately. I had been his witness many times when he signed property papers. Not only that, but the notary stamp was strange, the red ink pale and blotchy, nothing like the official seal from the local registry office. I drew a deep breath, set the papers back on the table, and looked straight at my parents and Sophia. "You truly think I'd believe this?" I said slowly. My father's voice hardened. "This has been notarized. Don't fight it. If you're wise, you'll move out and let Sophia take over." My mother cut in, her tone thick with reproach. "You're selfish, Caroline. Your grandparents loved Sophia more, and you know it. Let your sister have a chance. Don't cling to everything for yourself." Ha! I let out a cold laugh, one that made all three of them hesitate. "If you think faded ink and a forged signature can overturn the truth, then you've underestimated me far too much." Sophia's face flushed red as she slammed her hand on the table. "What do you mean by that? These are legal papers. You can't deny them. This house is mine." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms, my eyes locked on hers. "If it's truly legal, then there's nothing to fear in taking it to court. Right?" The room fell silent for several seconds. I could see my parents waver, exchanging uneasy glances. But then, my father clenched his jaw. "Fine, if you want to drag this into court, then just wait." I stood, gathering the stack of forged documents, and handed them back to him. "I don't need to keep these. I know Mr. Pierce will be very interested to take a look. And if this goes further, let the judge decide. I won't argue with you anymore." My tone was steady, but each word cut sharp and cold as steel. My mother burst into tears, trying to paint the image of a wounded parent. "You're truly cruel, Caroline. Do you not see us as family anymore?" I looked at her, a pang twisting in my chest before calmness settled back over me. Family doesn't forge documents to steal each other's legacy. If that's your definition of family, then I'll excuse myself from it. That. Sophia quickly pulled at her mother's arm, whispered something, then turned to me. "You'll regret this. I won't give up. This house will be mine sooner or later." I tilted my head slightly and replied curtly, "Go ahead, try." When the door slammed shut behind them, I sank into the chair, a chill running down my spine. This was no longer about hints or probing visits. This was a direct attack, bold and shameless. Yet, instead of fear, something else ignited inside me: resolve. I had prepared for this day, and I knew the shield of a lawful will and Mr. Pierce's support would protect me. That afternoon, I carried a photocopy of the forged documents to Mr. Pierce. He examined every detail, his brow furrowing. "This is clearly fake. The seal is irregular, the signature completely off. We can actually use this as evidence against them." I nodded, my eyes sharpening. That's exactly what I thought. They believed they could trick me, but they were wrong. "Mr. Pierce placed a steady hand on my shoulder, his voice firm. "Caroline, you've truly grown. Don't let them drag you down. Let the law speak." That night, I stepped alone onto the porch, the breeze from the lake cool against my skin. I thought of my grandparents, of the countless times they told me to protect this home. In my heart, I whispered to them, "They've begun, but I will not back down. This is not just a house. This is a promise, and I will keep it." I knew the battle had only just begun. And their first strike, instead of breaking me, only made me stronger. From that moment on, there would be no more awkward conversations or false words around the dinner table. Everything was exposed: on one side, truth; on the other, greed and deceit. And I, Carolyn Morgan, was ready to see it through to the end. 2 days after the farce of the forged will, I heard the rumble of engines from a distance. Looking out the window, my heart sank, but my face remained composed. A large moving truck stopped right at the gate, followed by 2 cars belonging to my parents and Sophia. Groups of hired movers stepped out, gloves on their hands, tools slung over their shoulders. They walked in as if this were some kind of legitimate eviction, their indifferent eyes betraying no understanding of the deceit they were part of. I stood in the middle of the living room, my hand resting on Grandpa's brass key, and took a deep breath. I had known this day would come, and I was ready. When my parents and Sophia entered the yard, I saw the smug satisfaction on their faces. Sophia marched ahead, dressed in a bright red dress as if this were her coronation day. My father followed close behind, his booming voice echoing across the porch. "Carolyn, we don't want this to get ugly, but you have no rights here anymore. The truck is ready. Pack your things and leave." I stepped to the doorway, my tone icy. "If you think I'm about to open this door for them, you might want to think again." Sophia sneered, stepping closer. "Get out right now. This is my house." I locked eyes with her, unblinking. "Take one step inside and see what happens." Just as the words left my mouth, Mr. Pierce, my attorney, stepped out from within the house, followed by a man in a black suit wearing the badge of the county property registry. My parents froze, and Sophia faltered half a step, though she still tried to keep her defiant look. Mr. Pierce's voice rang clear. "We have received reports of an attempt to trespass and seize this property using falsified documents. Today, we are here to verify lawful ownership." The representative from the county registry opened a folder, producing a notarized copy, his voice steady and formal. "The title of this property is currently registered under Caroline Morgan. All other documents you have submitted have been verified as fraudulent. Be advised, any attempt to forcibly seize this property is a violation of the law." The air in the yard seemed to explode. My mother burst into tears, clutching her chest and wailing. "No, this is Sophia's house. The grandparents promised it to her. How could this be?" My father's face turned crimson, his voice low and threatening. "You're all in this together. We won't let this stand. Caroline, do you really think your lawyers can save you?" He jabbed his finger at me, his eyes blazing with fury. I kept the faint smile on my face, standing firm at the doorway. "I don't need tricks, I only need the truth. And today, the truth has spoken." I turned to Sophia, who was trembling beneath the mask of her fury. "Do you still want to step inside? You said this is your house, then prove it. But don't bring forged papers to me ever again." The movers, men who had simply come to do a job, began murmuring among themselves. They glanced at one another, then at my parents with hesitation in their eyes. One of them finally muttered, "Sorry, we're not getting paid to be part of something illegal." With that, they stepped back, none daring to cross the threshold. Sophia screamed, her voice sharp and shrill. "All of you are against me. I'm the only one who deserves this house." My mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her as tears streamed down her cheeks. "Don't cry, sweetheart. We'll find another way. We won't let them steal everything from us." My father, meanwhile, stepped closer to me, his voice low and venomous. "You think this means you've won, Caroline? This fight isn't over. You will pay for this." I didn't move back. I looked straight into his eyes, my gaze calm and unflinching. "I'm not afraid anymore. I've lived too long in the shadow of this family, and now I stand in the light. If you want to drag me into court, I'm ready. If you want to scheme, I won't back down. But remember this, the law is on my side." Mr. Pierce stepped forward, his voice ringing with authority. "I advise you to leave immediately. Any further attempt to trespass or seize my client's property will result in immediate police involvement." The representative from the county registry added firmly, "We will file a report on today's incident. If you return with similar intentions, the legal consequences will be severe." In that moment, I felt the shift completely. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the child forced into silence, comparison, or dismissal. I was Caroline Morgan, the one my grandparents chose to protect this home. I didn't need to shout or cry, I only needed to stand firm, and the truth itself became my weapon. My parents and Sophia finally had no choice but to retreat. They muttered bitter threats, their faces twisted with anger and humiliation. Sophia threw me one last hateful glare before climbing into the car, shouting, "You'll regret this." I answered softly, "No, Sophia, You're the one who will regret it. Our pastor. When the moving truck rolled away, leaving the yard in silence, I stood on the porch and drew in a deep breath. Mr. Pierce placed a steady hand on my shoulder. You did very well today. You kept the composure most people wouldn't have. I smiled, looking out at the lake glittering in the midday sun. I didn't do this for myself. I did it for my grandparents, for the promise I made to them. Inside me, a feeling both light and resolute surged at once. I knew the battle was far from over. This was only the first climax, a warning bell that my family would not stop. But from this moment forward, I understood that I was ready to face whatever came. Because I was no longer fighting alone. At my side were the law, the truth, and the sacred memory of my grandparents, and I swore I would never let anyone touch that. Just a few days after the confrontation at my doorstep with the truck and the hired movers, I received a thick envelope from the family's law office. The postmark was fresh, the ink crisp, but the contents inside made me both laugh and shiver. It was an official lawsuit, in which my parents and Sophia demanded the court reconsider the division of my grandparents' estate and sought hundreds of thousands of dollars in compensation for my so-called illegal occupation. The language dripped with feigned outrage, painting me as greedy, accusing me of manipulating my grandparents' senility to seize their assets. I set the complaint down on the table, exhaled, and picked up the phone to call Mr. Pierce. I knew this was coming, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. And now it's right here in front of me. Mr. Pierce asked me to meet him the next morning at his office. When I stepped into the room lined with law books and thick case files, he was already waiting, a new folder on the desk before him. He slid it toward me, his eyes firm with conviction. Caroline, they're not only wrong. They've committed a crime. He flipped through the pages, pointing out the flaws in the forged will my family had presented. The shaky, unnatural signature, the invalid seal, even a clumsy typographical error in the property description. We don't just have the evidence to defend you, we have the grounds to strike back, and you have every right to use it. I straightened my back, my hands clasping tight on the table. Then let the truth be revealed. I don't want to avoid this anymore. They've chosen this path, so we will see it through to the end. My voice rang in the quiet office, startling even myself. I realized then that I was no longer trembling, no longer cornered. For the first time, I felt I was the one holding the advantage. Mr. Pierce nodded and pulled out another folder. We will counter with a cease and desist order. In it, we'll demand that they immediately stop all fabricated claims and attempts to interfere with the property. Along with it, we'll submit a notarized copy of the legitimate will, complete with the official signature and seal. This is evidence that cannot be denied. I looked at the papers, the bright red stamp standing out, and it felt as though my grandparents were right there beside me. All of my parents' and Sophia's lies suddenly seemed small, twisted, almost laughable. As we discussed the details, Mr. Pierce paused, his gaze fixed on me. Caroline, do you realize what this means? Once those falsified documents are presented in court, they won't just lose the case. They could face criminal charges for fraud and forgery. This will no longer be just a family dispute. It could become a criminal case. I drew a long breath, letting the silence linger for a few seconds before answering, my voice firm. I understand. But they chose this path themselves. I will not shield them again. If the law has to intervene, then it's the consequence of their own actions. The next day, the cease and desist order was officially sent to the law office representing my family. The wording was clear and precise, backed by certified evidence. I could almost picture their faces when they realized their entire scheme had been exposed. Instead of me being cornered, it was now they who trembled, facing the risk of the truth coming to light. In the weeks that followed, the tension only grew. I received strange messages from relatives. Some hinted at concern, others openly criticized me. How could you dare take your own parents to court? They asked. I replied quietly with just one line. I didn't take them to court, they dragged me there. Slowly, I learned not to be swayed by reproach. I knew I was on the right path, One afternoon, while reviewing documents with Mr. Pierce, I suddenly laughed. He looked up, surprised. "What's so funny?" I answered, "I just realized my whole life, I thought of myself as abandoned, as a victim. But now, I don't feel that way anymore. I'm not afraid of my parents or Sophia. I'm not afraid of comparisons or favoritism. I'm standing here, facing them, and I feel strong." Mr. Pierce smiled, his eyes full of pride. "That's the Caroline your grandparents wanted to see. The one who never backs down from lies." When I left Mr. Pierce's office that day, the late afternoon sun poured gold across the rooftops of the little town. I drew in a deep breath, feeling as if some of the weight on my shoulders had finally lifted. The legal battle was still ahead, but this time I was not entering it as a cornered defendant, I was stepping into it as someone in control. I was no longer the hunted. I was the one holding the board. And in that moment, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice, steady and resolute, echoing inside me. "Protect this house, Caroline. It is yours." I smiled faintly and whispered back in my heart, "I am doing that, Grandma, Grandpa. And I won't stop until the truth is laid bare." When my family saw that their first legal strike had failed, they quickly shifted to another strategy, an old but poisonous weapon: rumors. Not long after the cease and desist order had been sent, whispers began to reach me from distant relatives. An aunt in Wisconsin called, her voice edged with suspicion. "Caroline, I heard you forced your grandparents to change their will when they weren't of sound mind. Is that true?" My heart tightened, but I kept my tone calm. "No, Aunt. That is completely false. They made their will long ago, before their health declined, and it was properly notarized. I would never do what they're saying." But after I hung up, I knew exactly who was behind it. My mother. The very woman who gave me life was now spreading venom through the family, painting me as manipulative, accusing me of exploiting my grandparents in their frailty to steal their estate. Soon the extended family chat group, usually silent, was buzzing with gossip. Messages flew back and forth. "I can't believe Caroline would do that to her own grandparents. Sophia was always the dutiful one. Caroline has only ever been selfish." I read each word with my chest burning, but I knew if I lashed out, I would only fall into their trap. In those dark days, a small light appeared from an unexpected corner. My cousin Daniel, who lived in Minneapolis, called me. He and I had spent summers together at the lake house, and he knew exactly who I was. "Caroline," he whispered, as if afraid someone might overhear. "You need to know this. I recorded part of the family chat. It was your mom, the one who started the rumor that you forced your grandparents, and I also have an audio recording of a call between her and Aunt Clara. She said outright that we have to destroy Caroline's reputation if we want to win the case." My chest clenched, torn between pain and fury, but also sparked with a flicker of hope. Daniel sent me the audio files and screenshots immediately. When I played them back, I heard my mother's voice, sharp and merciless. She always pretends to be the good girl, but in truth she pressured her parents into signing papers when they were already senile. Everyone needs to see her real face. I sat in the familiar living room, staring out at the still waters of the lake, feeling as though the world itself was shifting around me. I knew I could no longer remain silent. They had launched a smear campaign, and if I didn't strike back, the truth would be buried forever. I called Mr. Pierce immediately and told him everything. He listened, his voice firm. "This is proof that they aren't just committing legal fraud, they are deliberately slandering your name. You have every right to use what Daniel gave you. Let the family see the truth, Caroline." That evening, I sat before my laptop, my hands trembling slightly as I drafted a long email. I attached everything. The notarized legal will, the certification from the county registry, samples of my grandparents' genuine signatures compared to the forged one, along with Daniel's recordings and screenshots. I wrote in a calm but unwavering tone. "I know there have been many rumors claiming I forced my grandparents to change their will. I cannot remain silent in the face of such lies. Here is the evidence. If you believe me, I am grateful. If not, at least you cannot say you haven't seen the truth." I stared at the blinking cursor, drew in a deep breath, and pressed send. Almost instantly, my phone began ringing. Some relatives messaged apologies. One aunt wrote, "Caroline, I was wrong to believe the rumors. I'm sorry for doubting you." An uncle in Chicago said, "We all know your grandparents were sharp and clear-minded. These documents prove it. I stand with you." But other messages chilled me. "Caroline, they're still your parents. How can you drag them into court?" Or, "We all know Sophia was the one closest to your grandparents." It was clear some would stand by my parents and Sophia not because of the truth, but because they preferred siding with the loudest voices and the best manipulators. I sat for hours, reading each response, feeling both relief and bitterness. Daniel messaged me, "You did the right thing. The truth needed to be spoken. If they don't believe it, that's their choice. But at least you're no longer silent." I replied, "Thank you. Not everyone has the courage to stand with the truth. But you did." Howard. The next day, the rumors in the family chat stopped cold. Whispers were smothered by evidence that could not be denied. I knew my parents and Sophia must have been furious seeing their smear campaign unravel. Yet inside, I felt a new strength. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the dismissed daughter forced into silence. I had stood up, fought back with truth, and I had won a round in this long war. That night, I walked out onto the porch and sat in the wooden chair where Grandpa once sat with his fishing rod. The breeze drifted gently, carrying the scent of lavender from the garden. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Grandma, Grandpa, I did the right thing. I defended my name, and more importantly, I defended the truth." In that moment, I no longer felt alone. I felt my grandparents there with me, solid as ever, lending me strength to keep fighting the battles still ahead. But after their smear campaign failed, the fury within my family did not fade. They went quiet for a time, but I knew it was only the false calm before a greater storm. What I didn't expect was that the first to pay the price would be Sophia, the sister who had always believed the world would bend to her will. At that time, Sophia was in the middle of applying for a position at a large real estate company in Minneapolis. She proudly boasted to the family that she would soon become an executive thanks to her skills and experience. But I knew better than anyone, the resume Sophia submitted was riddled with gaps and lies. She had once waved that forged will in front of me, personally signing her name onto an illegal document, and I had even managed to back up related emails. Reading through each piece of evidence again, I realized this was the moment for the truth to surface in its fullest sense. I reached out to the HR department of the real estate firm, attaching copies of the forged documents, images of her falsified signature, and an official certification from the county registry confirming the documents had been deemed fraudulent. In my email, I wrote a single sentence that carried all the weight it needed. "The candidate you are considering for employment has a record of property fraud, and the evidence below will make that clear." I added nothing else, letting the truth speak for itself. Within just a week, the news came faster than I expected. Sophia was immediately terminated, and her file was forwarded to the state's investigative authorities. The very fraudulent documents my family had once flaunted as proof now stood as hard evidence in a legal case. The matter was no longer mine alone to carry. It had escalated to an entirely different level where law and justice themselves had entered the arena. That evening, my phone buzzed incessantly. Sophia's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. On the other end came broken sobs, her voice choked with despair. You destroyed my life, Carolyn. I lost my job, my friends cut me off, everyone turned their back on me." I stayed silent for a moment, listening to the mixture of weeping and bitterness. Then I replied evenly, "No, Sophia. I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself when you signed your name onto forged documents. When you chose to conspire with our parents to create lies, you pushed yourself here." Her voice rose into a trembling scream. "I only did what they told me. I didn't have a choice." I tightened my grip on the phone and answered simply, "Everyone has a choice, and you chose deceit." Then I hung up, leaving her wails echoing on the other end of the line. News spread quickly through the community. The state investigative agency officially filed charges against Sophia and my parents for property fraud and forgery of notarized documents. One morning, as I sat on the porch reading, I saw a black car from the court pull up to the gate. A man in a neat suit stepped out, carrying a sealed stack of papers. He knocked firmly on the door and spoke with measured calm. "Is this the residence of Mr. Thomas Morgan, Mrs. Evelyn Morgan, and Miss Sophia Morgan?" I nodded, explaining that they no longer lived here, but he only needed to confirm the registered address. He left behind 3 thick envelopes, sealed in red, each one bearing the names of my father, my mother, and Sophia. Just a few hours later, I heard from a relative that my entire family had gone pale when the court summons landed in their hands. My father, a man so used to shouting orders, stood frozen, his face drained of color. My mother burst into tears, clutching her chest as if she couldn't breathe. Sophia hurled the packet of papers to the floor, screaming, "No, this can't be real, they're trying to ruin me." But no one believed their cries anymore. I pictured the scene, and my feelings were complicated. It wasn't triumph I felt, not satisfaction, but a weary sense of relief. Justice had finally done what I alone could not, forced them to face the consequences of their greed and deception. I walked out to the lake's edge, the wind stirring ripples across the water, and I remembered Grandpa's words. "Be strong, Carolyn. One day, the truth will stand with you." That day had come. Sophia and my parents could no longer hide behind the mask of a perfect family. They had been called out by the law, and this time, no excuse or plea could erase the truth. I, Caroline Morgan, was no longer the victim in their story. I was the witness, the guardian of my grandparents' legacy, the only one left standing in the storm they had brought upon themselves. Inside me rose a strange peace, not because they had fallen, but because I had kept my promise. To protect the house, to protect the truth. And as I watched the last light of day stretch across the lake, I knew the journey was nearing its end, with the truth shining clear, leaving no room for shadows. The final hearing closed on an early autumn morning, golden leaves scattering across the county courthouse steps. The judge read the verdict with firm clarity. All legal property, including the lake house and the surrounding land, was recognized as belonging solely to me. The forged documents my family had submitted were declared invalid, and the fraud case was officially handed over to the prosecutor's office for criminal proceedings. I sat quietly, neither cheering nor weeping. All I felt was the heavy door of the past finally closing, returning me to the quiet I had long awaited. My parents and Sophia left the courtroom stunned, no more threats, no more staged tears. A few weeks later, I received a short letter by mail. Just a few lines. "We will have no more contact. From now on, we go our separate ways." No signature, but I knew immediately it was my mother's hand. I folded the letter, slipped it into a drawer, without bitterness, without regret. Everything had come to its end. When all the noise finally faded, I returned to the lake house, the place where everything had begun. The home was still the same as ever, the white walls, the wooden porch, the darkened roof tiles, and the garden full of purple lavender. I stood before the lake, the breeze stirring ripples across the surface. In that wind, I could almost hear my grandparents' voices. "Protect what is worth keeping." I smiled softly, my hand brushing against the old brass key I still carried with me. I had done it not through bitterness or gloating, but through resolve and loyalty to my promise. In the days I lived alone there, I often walked the garden paths, tending to the rows of vegetables Grandpa once planted, baking the same pies Grandma had taught me to make. Sometimes, I sat on the porch watching the fiery sunset reflected on the lake, quietly realizing I no longer held resentment. My victory was not that they lost, it was that I had preserved what was mine, what my grandparents had entrusted to me. Strangely, when it was all over, I felt no triumph. There were no cheers, no sweet taste of revenge. What I felt was a rare peace, as though the heavy weight pressing on my shoulders for years had finally been set down. I knew peace is not something everyone finds easily, but I also knew it only comes when you dare to draw boundaries. If you're hearing this story, perhaps you too have felt the pain of being hurt by your own family. Perhaps you once hoped family would be your safe harbor, but instead found favoritism, comparison, even betrayal. I want to tell you this: family ties are not a ticket for anyone to enter your life and cause you pain. Blood is not a reason to tolerate toxicity. Setting boundaries with a toxic family is not selfish. It is the only way to save yourself. I once believed that cutting ties with my parents was a sin, that it would brand me as ungrateful. But after everything, I realized the real sin was letting them go on trampling me, stripping away the peace and self-respect I deserved. You can do the same. You can protect your own inner legacy, whether that is a home, a memory, or simply your dignity. You can live a full life without being bound to those who only bring you harm. Believe me, there is a wide world out there where you can write your own story, where family is defined by genuine love, not by chains of control or manipulation. I, Caroline Morgan, learned that lesson through the hardest years of my life. And today, as I stand before this lake, I want to leave you with one message: protect what is worth keeping. Do not let anyone, even under the name of family, take away your peace and your true worth. Because in the end, the most important thing you can preserve is yourself, and a life you choose to live with truth and love. Thank you for listening, and I will see you again at this time every day.